I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr. In my work as a teacher, a writer, and a filmmaker, there's a lesson I've learned over and over again that I'd like to share with you. It connects to the value of knowing our history and its importance to our democracy at a time riven with tension and distrust, pain and despair. Progress is not linear. The arc of justice that our ancestors sacrificed so much to bend can always be bent back toward injustice. And without constant vigilance, advances toward freedom and equality can be rolled back. History teaches us that. But it also teaches us that what stands between us and such rollbacks are we the people, exercising our rights as citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot let down our guard on protecting and fighting for the other threads that make up our social fabric. Now more than ever, we must defend the right of every American to vote. We must defend the very affirmative action programs that launch many people of color and women of all colors into their positions of authority and power. We must end the madness of mass incarceration and its devastating impact on the African American and Latinx communities. We must fight for health care as a right for all Americans. And we must fight to keep the pipeline of educational opportunity open for the next generation and the generation after that. We must defend the immigrant and the stranger, the impoverished and the forgotten, and speak sensitively and firmly to the fears of those who see globalization as a threat and who worry that the social and cultural progress of those who look different than they do will wipe away all that they have known. And regardless of our ideological differences, we must link arms and stand or kneel publicly against anti-Semitism, against homophobia, against Islamophobia, against anti-black racism, and ladies and gentlemen, against white supremacist ideology in all of its hideously ugly, violent forms. This is no time for equivocation or false equivalences. This is a time for truth. We cannot allow the forces of reaction to turn back the clock on American racial relations, obliterating the heroic efforts of legions of Americans, white and black, Asian and Latino, Jewish and Christian, Muslim and Hindu, gay, straight, and trans, who risked and sometimes tragically gave their lives to make certain that the arc of the moral universe bent toward justice. Too many hands today are trying to bend that arc back in another direction. And those of us who love truth and justice and the principles of free speech and inquiry in a democracy upon which this great nation of ours was founded must stand against those forces of tyranny and lost causes. History is our guide. We will not be turned back. In closing, let us heed the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who in his sermon at the Detroit Council of Churches, noon Lenten services in 1961, said this: "All life is interrelated. We are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. As long as there's poverty in the world, no man can be totally rich, even if he has $1 billion. As long as diseases are rampant and millions of people cannot expect to live more than 28 years, no man can be totally healthy, even if he just got a clean bill of health from the Mayo Clinic. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the way the world is made. I didn't make it that way. You didn't make it that way. We all found it that way. Thank you and good evening."